There were 2 glasses of wine on the table, red Merlot. One still warm. But I'd been away for the last 3 days. My name is David Weston. I'm 52. Senior systems analyst at a logistics firm based out of Irvine, California. I've been married to Julia for 19 years. We live in the quieter end of Temecula, in a 2-story beige house with a lemon tree in the backyard and a mortgage we refinanced twice. My return from Phoenix was unscheduled. The conference ended early, and instead of staying the extra night like I told her I would, I booked the 6:20 p.m. Southwest flight, took a cab from Ontario Airport, and arrived home just before 10. I didn't text her. I thought I'd surprise her. Maybe catch a smile. I hadn't seen one in a while. She wasn't in the living room. The house was still. The TV was off. Just the dim hum of the refrigerator and the faint thrum of the sprinklers kicking on out back. Then I saw it. On the dining table, a bottle of Merlot opened. 2 glasses. One half full, still faintly fogged from the heat of a hand. The other almost empty, with a pale lipstick trace near the rim. Julia never drank alone. I stood there for a moment, still holding my carry-on bag, trying to decide if I was overreacting. Upstairs, I heard water running, the shower. I didn't go up. Not yet. I moved into the kitchen and opened the fridge, not looking for food. Just trying to do something normal. A way to collect my thoughts. Inside were 2 leftover containers from Trattoria Brunello. She hates Italian takeout. Said it always gave her heartburn. Yet here it was. The floor creaked above me. She was out of the shower now. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen island. When she came downstairs, wearing her robe and towel drying her hair, she stopped in her tracks when she saw me. "You're home?" she said, her voice tight with surprise. "Flight got changed," I replied. "Figured I'd come back a day early." She nodded slowly, then smiled. "Wish you told me. I'd have cooked." I said nothing. Just watched her move toward the wine glasses. She hesitated, almost imperceptibly, then picked up both and carried them to the sink. I heard the faint clink of glass against porcelain. Then water running. I still didn't say anything. She leaned against the counter. "How was Phoenix?" "Dry," I said. "Met a lot of vendors. Sat through a dozen panels on supply chain resilience. The usual." She smiled politely. That distant, practiced smile. It used to be different. I remembered how she'd greet me at the door. The way her face used to light up. How she used to kiss me before I'd even set my keys down. Now her robe was closed a little tighter than usual. Her posture was careful. There was a guardedness in her movements, as though I'd walked into a scene that had already ended. "Adam asleep?" I asked. "Just went down. He had a hard time falling asleep tonight. Our son was 10. Restless like me. Lately, he'd been asking a lot of questions I didn't have good answers for." I carried my bag upstairs, took a shower, unpacked slowly. When I climbed into bed, she was already turned toward the wall, breathing steadily. Her back rose and fell in the dark. I lay there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling fan. Something wasn't right. But I couldn't name it yet. Not with certainty. It's a strange feeling, being in your own house, in your own bed, with the woman you've shared nearly 2 decades with, and feeling like an intruder. But then something happened that I didn't expect, even in my worst fantasies. The next morning began like most others. At least outwardly. The house came alive with the low rustle of routine, a child brushing his teeth too quickly, the microwave humming, the click of heels on tile. But beneath all of it, a silence lingered. A silence not born of peace, but of carefulness. The kind that forms when someone is working to cover something up. Julia made breakfast. Scrambled eggs. Toast. A sliced pear. Nothing remarkable, yet everything precisely as it should be. As if to suggest nothing was wrong. But that, in itself, felt unusual. She wasn't usually this attentive to detail unless guests were expected. The perfection of it made him uneasy. It reminded him of scenes in old detective films, moments when the set dressing is too clean, the furniture too aligned. After Adam left for school, she left too. Said she had errands? Her voice was light, her posture casual, but her exit was rushed. He watched from the upstairs window as she pulled out of the driveway in her Highlander, tapping on her phone before she even turned the corner. Not unusual. But this time, the moment stayed with him. He returned to the kitchen and found her tablet on the counter. The screen was still smudged from Adam's fingerprints. He almost dismissed it. But something made him pause. An urge not yet fully formed. He turned it on. The screen came alive with a cartoon paused mid-frame. Likely something their son had been watching before school. But when he pressed the home button, a series of app icons revealed themselves. One of them, Telegram, caught his attention. Julia never used Telegram. At least not that he knew of. It wasn't one of their usual communication tools. He didn't open the app. He didn't need to. Instead, he placed the tablet down and walked into the garage. He stood there among boxes of winter clothes and gardening tools, pretending to look for a wrench. But what he was really doing was processing a thought he couldn't quite verbalize yet. Something was beginning to fray. Later that afternoon, he picked up Adam from school. The boy was chatty, excited about a science project involving volcanoes. David listened, smiled where appropriate, nodded at the right cues. But his mind drifted, not away from his son, but deeper into the subtext of things. The teacher's comment in passing as they walked out. Julia said she'd be picking him up today, but plans must have changed. That small statement lodged itself like a stone in a shoe. Uncomfortable. Persistent. At home, while Adam worked on his drawing at the kitchen table, David sat at his desk and scrolled through their shared calendar. It was something they both used, a digital agreement of errands, events, and routines. But he noticed small irregularities. Time blocks marked. Client consult, outreach follow-up, strategy review. Vague phrases. No locations. No context. Julia worked part-time as a project coordinator for a nonprofit, but these entries felt less like appointments and more like placeholders. Coverings.by evening, she returned. Apologized for being late. Blamed traffic. Then spent an unusual amount of time checking their son's homework, asking more questions than usual, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes. Again, nothing overt. But David's instincts, honed from years of managing logistics systems and spotting inefficiencies, couldn't ignore the rhythm that was now offbeat. That night, she went to bed early. Said she had a headache. He stayed up in the den, rereading old work reports, sipping cold coffee, listening to the walls breathe. Around midnight, he rose and walked through the house, lights off, moving with the quiet ease of someone who had memorized every creak in the floorboards. In the living room, he paused. The wine bottle was still in the recycling bin, same one from the night before. He pulled it out gently. Checked the label. A reserve Merlot. Not from their usual grocery runs. It had come from the upscale shop in Old Town, the one they only visited for anniversaries or gifts. Back in the kitchen, he opened the drawer where they kept receipts. Leafed through the recent pile. No trace of a wine purchase. Not that it proved anything. But it added weight. A wine bought for a special evening that wasn't meant for him. He slept lightly, if at all. The next day came with routine again. Julia seemed relaxed, unburdened. As though some internal knot had been loosened. She hummed softly while folding laundry. David, seated at the table, watched her with a distant kind of affection, not cold, but observant. Measured. She looked beautiful, as always. But he found himself wondering how long he had been admiring a version of her that no longer existed. Over the next few days he said nothing. No confrontation. No accusations. Just quiet note-taking. Changes in behavior. Patterns. The way she now kept her phone face down, always within arm's reach. The password change on her laptop. The new perfume, floral, not her usual scent. All of it was subtle. Insufficient alone. But together, they formed the faint outline of something else. On Thursday evening, He noticed she had a new contact name in her favorites. L. Turner. No photo, no first name. Just an initial and a surname. It hadn't been there the week before. He asked about it casually. She said it was someone from the foundation, a donor liaison. David nodded. Said nothing more. But that night, while she showered, he checked the iPad again. Telegram was open to the login screen now. Cleared. Reset. She had removed all traces. That was when he felt it. Not certainty. Not even anger. Just a quiet shift in his bones. A realization that whatever path they were on, they were no longer walking it together. He didn't know yet what the truth was. But he knew this. Whatever it was, it had already begun. It was the first stab in the back. But the real blow was yet to come. The quiet detachment that had settled over David began to harden into something else. Not anger. Not yet. But resolve. He had spent the last 20 years solving problems with precision, identifying failures in systems others assumed were stable, dissecting inefficiencies that hid beneath surface-level order. Now, for the first time, the system in question was his own life. He began with the calendar. Not the one they shared digitally, but the paper planner Julia kept in the drawer beneath the phone charger. It was an old habit from her college days. She claimed writing things down made them more real. For the past several years, it had mostly been shopping lists, Adam's school events, the occasional dentist appointment. But now, there were entries marked with vague initials and blocked times. LT12, 2p. Brunch, Dana Point. Strategy catch-up. He flipped back through previous months, noting when the pattern began. Mid-May. It coincided with her switch to part-time work. From there, he moved methodically. Not searching for drama. Searching for patterns. He installed a discrete logging tool on their shared desktop. Nothing intrusive, nothing illegal. It simply recorded times of access, saved copies of open documents, tracked usage. She barely used the machine, preferring her laptop. Still, it was another line in the grid. Next came the router logs. Years ago, during a project involving remote warehouse optimization, he installed an advanced firmware setup on their home network. It kept historical data, device connections, timestamps, IP activity. Most people would have overlooked it. Julia had. David hadn't. In the logs, he noted repeated access from a device labeled MBPLT1, a MacBook Pro not registered under their household accounts. It connected during hours when Julia was home alone. Always between noon and 3. 3 separate Tuesdays, once on a Friday. The guest network had been used. The pattern was too consistent to ignore. Still, he said nothing. He continued smiling at dinners. Driving Adam to baseball practice. Helping with homework. Even joining Julia on a Sunday trip to the farmer's market. She held his hand that day. It felt practiced. Like someone remembering choreography from an old dance. He let her lead. He began reviewing bank statements. Not just the monthly summaries, but individual transactions. Most were mundane. Groceries, gas, utility payments. But a few caught his eye. Charges from boutique cafes he'd never heard her mention. A receipt for 2 admissions at a spa in Newport Beach. A hotel charge from Lido House, not on a weekend, but a Wednesday. She had told him she was in a board meeting that day. He photocopied the receipts and stored them in a folder labeled Q3 reports, tucked behind a stack of old tax returns. He watched her more carefully now. Not with suspicion, but with the precision of someone analyzing behavior under stress. Her smile came quicker these days, almost reflexive. Her laughter, when it came, was louder than usual. She complimented his shirts, asked about his projects at work, offered spontaneous back rubs while he watched the news. But the affection no longer reached her eyes. The house itself began to feel like a study in performance. The way she closed the bathroom door now, even when just brushing her teeth. The cautious pause before answering a text. The occasional slip when she referred to places he hadn't mentioned, a dinner she thought he'd said was cancelled, a conversation she claimed they'd had, but hadn't. Then, there was Adam. Their son, once oblivious to adult complications, began asking strange questions. Why does Mom call someone else when you're away? Who is Uncle Ben? Why does Mom always leave after you go to bed? David listened quietly, never pressing. But one evening, after tucking Adam in, he found himself staring at the boy's bookshelf. The titles were familiar, the order unchanged. But a small notebook was tucked behind the third volume of an adventure series. In it, Adam had drawn pictures. One page showed a tall man with sunglasses, standing beside their Highlander. Another showed Julia with a heart above her head. The word Ben was written next to it. David closed the notebook carefully, placed it exactly where it had been. He took nothing from it except confirmation. In his office, he kept a ledger. Not digital. Not recorded anywhere else. Just a slim black journal where he transcribed every inconsistency, every deviation, every recorded timestamp. Dates, times, locations. Each entry cross-referenced with a receipt, a calendar note, or a router log. He began rising earlier, waking before the sun, walking through the neighborhood under the pretense of morning exercise. He passed by the coffee shop near the park, the one Julia never mentioned but had visited according to the credit card statements. Twice he saw a man there, always seated in the corner, always alone, always checking his watch. Mid-40s. Trim. Wore a navy sport coat and no ring. Once, Julia had returned from errands wearing lipstick, not her usual shade, and carrying a bag from that very shop. David never approached him. He simply noted it in the ledger. The routine of observation gave him calm. It replaced the chaos of uncertainty with a kind of order. He didn't act rashly. He didn't confront her. He didn't allow the emotions to dictate the pace. Instead, he waited. Patiently. Quietly. Measuring the shadows, aligning the pieces. It wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about the truth. Not the kind that explodes into shouting matches and slammed doors, but the kind that rewrites the foundation of a life. He looked at Adam differently now. Not with less love, never that, but with a slow-burning question that had taken root and refused to be ignored. There had been comments over the years, offhand jokes from relatives. The boy's auburn hair, so unlike his parents'. His sharp cheekbones, oddly out of place in their family albums. Julia had always brushed it off. Said it came from her grandfather. David had believed her. Now he wasn't sure. That was what disturbed him most, not the possibility of betrayal, but the realization that he had stopped asking questions long ago. That he had accepted too many explanations without scrutiny. He stared at the mirror one night, brushing his teeth. He barely recognized the man staring back, not because of age or fatigue, but because of the questions in his eyes. For years, he had trusted a version of life built on quiet certainties. Now, every assumption had become a potential lie. He knew what came next. The final step in any system audit, verification. And that meant testing. Real testing. Not assumptions. Not patterns. DNA. He didn't rush it. He waited until the right moment. Until the next Friday afternoon when Julia was at the spa, when Adam was at a friend's birthday party. He opened the filing cabinet, retrieved their son's medical records, and began reading. What he found made his chest tighten. Blood type O negative. He was A positive. Julia was AB. That wasn't possible. It wasn't even close. And for the first time in weeks, David felt something cold settle into place. But what he found later turned everything upside down. The realization did not erupt like a thunderclap. It landed with a soft, precise finality, the kind of knowledge that does not scream but simply refuses to be denied. The blood type discrepancy was not merely a curiosity. It was biological proof. A simple fact immune to interpretation. His son could not be his. Not genetically. Not scientifically. There was no emotional preparation for that kind of truth. It did not sting like betrayal. It settled deeper, like the absence of something long assumed present: trust, belonging, certainty. David did not react. He continued his day as if nothing had changed. He responded to emails. He approved a logistics protocol for a San Diego warehouse expansion. He nodded through dinner. He helped Adam with a school project involving biorockets. Then he sat on the porch after nightfall, watching the shadows stretch across the lawn, and felt something shift in him. Not collapse. Not rage. Just a quiet recalibration. He ordered a DNA test the next day. Not out of impulse, but necessity. The kit arrived in a discreet package. He collected samples carefully, following every step with the exactness of a man trained to track margin errors in multi-million-dollar inventory systems. It wasn't paranoia now. It was process. He mailed the kit and marked the expected results window in his planner with a single black dot. In the days that followed, Julia behaved normally. Which meant artificially. Her routines continued, now a shade too polished. She became unusually affectionate. A brush of the hand, small touches on the arm, laughter a few notes too high. It had the texture of performance, as if she sensed something unraveling and was trying to tighten the mask. David noticed everything. The altered patterns in her voice. The unprompted questions about his schedule. Her increased interest in family dinners, spontaneous photos, oddly timed reminiscing. These were not signs of reconnection. These were cover tracks. And every one of them told him she suspected he knew. He did not alter his behavior. He did not sleep less or eat more or drink differently. He simply waited. All systems require patience, especially when approaching failure points. The results arrived on a Monday. He opened the email in his office, alone. The document loaded slowly. The header was professional, clinical. The conclusion was clear. Probability of paternity, 0%. The body of the text listed genetic markers like an audit report. Line after line of mismatches. Objective, unfeeling, absolute. David sat still for 10 minutes. Not because he was stunned, but because now he understood the depth of the deception. This was not an affair. This was an alternate life, constructed inside his own, designed to survive scrutiny. And for over a decade, it had succeeded. Not because it was flawless, but because he had not looked. He retrieved the black notebook and opened to a blank page. He wrote the result at the top, then turned to the beginning. Every inconsistency now had a context. Every unexplained gap, every strange timing, every lie dressed in practicality, it all fit. The late-night meetings, the sudden friendships, the unexplained absences masked by errands. Ben Carter. The name came back to him like a thread pulled tight. Just a friend. College acquaintance. A man with too much presence in the background. Too many coincidences involving donations, shared projects, overlapping schedules. David had dismissed him. The way a husband often dismisses distant stars in his wife's orbit. But now, those stars aligned. He returned to the receipts. One caught his attention, a dinner reservation at the Seville in Newport Beach. 4 months earlier. A Tuesday. Party of 2. He checked the bank statement. Matched. Then checked the guest login history from the router on that date. The MacBook had connected again. During the same window. He revisited the Telegram icon on the iPad. Still untouched, still reset. But the app history in the background logs indicated recent use. She had deleted it daily. Wiped clean every evening. A perfect cycle. David had never once suspected. Not in any real way. He had accepted the rhythms of marriage, the slow cooling, the inevitable fatigue, the separate routines. He had believed those things were natural. Not constructed. Now the structure revealed itself. She had never planned to leave. Not because she loved him, but because the lie had become more valuable than the truth. It offered protection, consistency, financial security. He had become the perfect shield. He pulled up his email and drafted a message. Short. Formal. To a colleague whose brother practiced family law. He requested a referral. Mentioned the need for discretion. Then scheduled an appointment for Wednesday at noon. That evening, Julia cooked pasta and played a playlist of songs from their college years. She asked if he remembered their first dance. He said he did. He remembered everything. Every step, every turn. She laughed and sipped wine. He watched her. Not with anger, but with the quiet knowledge of a man who had just witnessed a complete system expose its vulnerability. She kissed him goodnight and lingered a moment too long, as if gauging his temperature. He smiled gently. Let her leave the room first. Later, he stood in their bedroom doorway, watching her sleep. Her face was peaceful, the mask at rest. He wondered briefly if she ever loved him. Not in the abstract, but in the way someone chooses love, deliberately, daily, without needing to deceive. He doubted it now. But the question no longer hurt. He turned and walked back to his office. Sat at his desk. Opened a blank document. He began drafting a timeline. Names, dates, financial movements, DNA findings, calendar entries, correspondence, digital access. Not emotional reactions. Just data. He labeled the file. Family Audit, Phase 1. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. David approached the next phase not with anger, but with strategy. It was not about retribution in the traditional sense. No grand gestures, no confrontations. What he sought now was not vengeance, but clarity. Correction. A realignment of what had been warped beyond recognition. He began by consulting a lawyer. Not the one they used for the estate plan or Julia's nonprofit filings. This one specialized in high-asset divorces and custody disputes. Her office was located on the 18th floor of a corporate tower in downtown San Diego. It overlooked the marina, all clean lines and frost glass doors. He selected her precisely because she came with no previous entanglements. No shared acquaintances. No familiarity with Julia. He arrived prepared. Printed documentation. Router logs. Bank statements. The DNA test report. Everything bound neatly in folders labeled by category. When the lawyer finished reviewing the materials, she looked up with an expression David recognized from years of boardroom briefings, a mix of professional detachment and calculated intent. She outlined a path. The legality was clear. Paternity fraud opened channels for contesting child support, amending custody claims, and challenging spousal asset claims based on misrepresentation. David listened without reaction. He took notes, asked precise questions, and nodded only when necessary. He agreed to the filing strategy. Custody redefinition. Financial restructuring. The language was dry, but he knew what it meant. He returned home that afternoon with nothing visible on his face. Julia greeted him with a casual kiss and mentioned a PTA meeting. She asked if he could help Adam with math homework that evening. David smiled and said he'd take care of it. That night, he backed up every digital asset connected to their shared accounts. iCloud photos, email archives, message logs. Then he created a new encrypted folder and transferred his personal financial records into it. He changed all passwords. Opened new accounts under a different bank, placed flags on their existing accounts to trigger notifications for any unusual transfers. He revisited the deed of their home. The property had been refinanced twice. Julia's name had been added during the last refinance. He made a call to a financial advisor to explore the conditions for separation of ownership under fraud claims. The advisor, experienced in such matters, requested documentation. David emailed the DNA results that night. Then came the insurance. He updated the beneficiaries on his life and disability policies. Julia's name was removed. He appointed his sister, a quiet, steady accountant in Sacramento, as the trustee for anything intended for Adam. It was an emotionally difficult decision, but a necessary one. He could no longer operate under the assumption that his son's welfare could be trusted to Julia's discretion. He waited a week before initiating the financial freeze. On a Tuesday morning, he executed the first wave. The joint credit card was closed. The joint savings account was locked, pending legal review. The home equity line of credit was suspended. He paid off remaining balances on their utilities from his personal account and notified the relevant providers to transfer them into his name only. Julia would discover the changes gradually. He wanted her confused, not alarmed. Meanwhile, he continued to observe. She became more erratic, not outwardly, but in the small ways people become unsettled when they feel a structure shift beneath them. She checked the mailbox more frequently. Her laptop was open at odd hours. She made long calls from the car in the driveway instead of the kitchen. She started asking questions. Had he changed anything on the mortgage? Did he see a strange email from the bank? Did the utility company call? He offered vague responses. Feigned forgetfulness. The performance was necessary. Behind the scenes, his lawyer filed preliminary motions. Paternity fraud would be the centerpiece. The case was strengthened by the lack of legal adoption on David's part. California law provided specific avenues in cases where misrepresentation of paternity led to prolonged financial and parental obligations. His lawyer explained that the court would likely require mediation, psychological assessments, and possibly DNA testing through state-approved channels. David welcomed it. The deeper the scrutiny, the stronger his position. Next came the social layer. David contacted the private investigator his lawyer recommended. The man was efficient. Discreet. Within 4 days he delivered photographs. Julia and Ben Carter. A dinner in La Jolla. A weekend at a beach rental in Del March. The man had been thorough. Timestamps, angles, license plates. Each photo was labeled and indexed. David printed 3 sets and stored them in separate locations. He notified Adam's school of a temporary change in custodial oversight. Nothing formal yet. Just a note that David would be the primary contact going forward. Julia was copied on the communication. She hadn't responded. But that evening, she cooked dinner and asked more questions than usual about David's schedule. He answered casually. He didn't tell her what was coming. The final piece of the plan involved a transfer. David liquidated a portion of his restricted stock options from work and moved the proceeds into a trust. The beneficiary was Adam. The trust was structured to activate only under specific conditions, full legal custody to David, with Julia's parental access restricted pending review. The language was airtight. The funds would remain protected from any future marital asset claims. He sent a final email to his lawyer that Friday evening. It included a full timeline of the fraud, an itemized list of financial damages, and a scanned letter he had written but not yet delivered, a declaration of intent to dissolve the marriage and request immediate family court intervention. He signed it quietly. Then deleted the draft from his computer. At dinner that night, Julia smiled across the table. Asked about the weekend. David told her they might take Adam to the planetarium. He made no mention of the documents. No indication of the legal missile already in motion. She poured wine. He declined. She didn't press. By the time she finished her second glass, David had already received the alert. The court had filed the first hearing date. The process had begun. She had no idea how he would react. It happened on a Sunday. Clear skies, a mild breeze, the kind of Southern California day that invited leisure, not reckoning. But David chose it precisely because of its ordinary feel. Unremarkable days left fewer traces. And he needed calm. He needed the surface of life to look smooth, even as the depth beneath was about to rupture. Julia had planned a small brunch. Just them, Adam, and 2 guests, a neighbor and her husband from 3 doors down. It was part of her attempt to reassert normalcy. She had been acting as if nothing in their lives had shifted, offering spontaneous affection, scheduling family photos, bringing up possible summer trips. Her behavior had taken on a desperate brightness, like a house lit entirely by floodlights to ward off a prowler already inside. David watched it all unfold without reaction. He moved through the preparations with his usual quiet efficiency. He toasted the bread, arranged the cut fruit, brewed coffee. He greeted the neighbors with a firm handshake and polite questions about their home renovations. All of it measured, all of it practiced. The dining room table had been set carefully. Flowers in a glass vase. Matching napkins. fresh juice. Julia wore a pale green dress and had styled her hair in waves she usually reserved for more formal events. Adam sat between them, animated, bouncing between topics like boys do when they sense something's off but can't name it. David let him speak. He responded when needed, his tone calm, unremarkable. Halfway through the meal, David stood. No warning. No gesture. He simply excused himself and returned moments later with a stack of envelopes, bound together with a paperclip. He set them on the table, beside Julia's plate, and resumed his seat. No one said anything? Not immediately. But the mood shifted. The neighbor smiled politely, unsure of the context. Julia froze. David gestured once, a subtle nod. Julia's hand moved slowly toward the papers. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the stack closer. Inside were copies. The DNA results. The photographs. The timeline. The notarized letter of intent to file for divorce. The full financial breakdown of joint asset dissolution. A letter to the family court detailing the misrepresentation of paternity, and the request for emergency reevaluation of custody. No one spoke. But Julia's eyes traced each page like someone reading her own obituary. David watched her. Not for her reaction, he didn't need theatrics. He wanted to observe the moment truth became undeniable. The moment when every cover story, every carefully placed misdirection, collapsed under the weight of fact. Julia's face drained of color. Her fingers hovered over the last page, the one bearing her signature from a form she hadn't realized she'd signed. David had retrieved it from their mortgage documents, a declaration stating, under penalty of perjury, that all financial disclosures had been accurate and all parental claims truthful. The neighbor stood. Quietly. Apologized. They made their exit quickly, understanding they had walked into something beyond repair. David helped them gather their things, escorted them out, and returned to find Julia standing near the window, staring at the backyard as if it could offer escape. She didn't cry. Not then. She remained still, her hands clutched around the envelope stack like a raft. Adam asked a question from the hallway. David responded with calm reassurance, his voice even, unstrained. Later that night, after Adam had gone to bed, the silence in the house felt heavier. Julia sat on the edge of the couch, her posture rigid, as though movement might shatter her. David stood across from her, one hand resting on the back of the chair, the other holding the final envelope he had not yet given her. He extended it without expression. Inside was the photograph Julia had avoided being in. It was from their anniversary dinner 6 months earlier, the one where the photographer offered to take a family portrait, and she had excused herself to the restroom just before the shutter clicked. At the time, David hadn't thought much of it. But the memory had returned to him days ago, framed in a new understanding. He remembered her avoidance. Her sudden preoccupation with fixing her makeup. Her hesitation when the photographer asked if they wanted one with all three of them. She hadn't wanted to be in the frame. Because she knew what it represented. David had included the photo in the envelope because it symbolized everything that had led them here. Not a single betrayal, but the quiet, repeated choice to remove herself from the life they were supposed to be building. Julia held the photograph in both hands. Her gaze fixed on Adam's face, laughing, unaware, standing beside a man he still believed was his father. David watched her for several moments, then turned and walked to the kitchen. He poured a glass of water, stood by the sink, and listened as the weight of her decisions filled the room like fog. There were no screams. No begging. No explanations. Only the sound of silence between two people who had run out of illusions. That night, David slept in the guest room. He closed the door without a word. Locked it. Not out of fear, but finality. In the morning, he filed the documents. And she wasn't the only one in this charade. The court date was set for early spring. The case had moved swiftly, accelerated by the clarity of the evidence and the nature of the claims. Few family law matters come without ambiguity. This one carried very little. The DNA test, the concealed affair, the financial misrepresentation, it had all been laid out in orderly, time-stamped precision. There were no accusations, only facts. No appeals to emotion, only documentation. David had built the case the same way he had once built server redundancies and freight routing algorithms, with logic, structure, and foresight. Julia retained counsel late in the process. Not the polished, efficient kind David had hired. Her lawyer was a general practitioner, more comfortable drafting wills than fighting custody battles. Their first response had come with a delay, their second with contradiction, and by the third exchange, it was evident they were not prepared for the scope of David's preparation. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, Julia's behavior changed. The brightness she had tried to sustain flickered, then died. She stopped trying to act as if nothing had happened. She stopped asking questions, stopped offering explanations. She existed in the home like a guest waiting for checkout, polite, quiet, distant. Even her presence around Adam shifted. Her affection became erratic. Forced at times, absent at others. David said nothing. The process was now legal, not emotional. The day before the hearing, he sat down with Adam in the backyard. He didn't discuss betrayal, didn't mention DNA, didn't reference the court. He talked about honesty. About responsibility. About the way people sometimes build stories to protect themselves, but how truth has a way of surfacing, even when it's painful. Adam listened. He didn't ask why. He just nodded. Children often sense more than they can articulate. David had learned that long ago. The courtroom was quiet, sterile, unimpressed by drama. It was not a stage. It was a processor. A machine designed to extract resolution from conflict. Julia sat across from him at the respondent's table, flanked by her attorney and a stack of notes that never left the folder. Her expression was unreadable. She wore a gray blazer and flat shoes. No makeup. Her hands trembled slightly when the clerk read the case number aloud. David's lawyer presented the documentation with clarity and precision. The DNA test, the financial inconsistencies, the concealed relationship, the recorded misstatements in legal documents, each item delivered without flourish. Just fact. The judge, an older woman with a reputation for bluntness, asked only 3 questions. All of them addressed to Julia. Her answers were brief. One of them was a silent nod. The custody judgment was not a surprise. Sole custody to David, with visitation to be re-evaluated pending psychological evaluation. The financial restitution order was more direct than expected. Julia was to repay a portion of joint funds withdrawn under false pretenses and surrender her claim to equity in the home. The court recognized the fraud. David's lawyer had called it misrepresentation in a familial context. The judge called it deception. Julia remained seated after the verdict. Her lawyer whispered something. She didn't respond. Her hands stayed folded on the table. Her eyes never lifted. When the judge read out the verdict, David looked at Julia. She was sitting alone, without a lawyer, her makeup smudged. He just walked out. Without a word. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled of dust and eucalyptus. The sun was already starting to angle toward late afternoon. David didn't speak to the reporters gathered by the steps. There were none. This wasn't a story for headlines. It was a quiet tragedy, one of thousands that passed through those halls. But it didn't end there. A week later, David filed a motion to amend the birth certificate. It was granted. The court recognized the updated paternity status. Adam's records were revised. The man who had fathered him biologically was not the man who had raised him. And the state now recognized that distinction. David didn't tell Adam everything. Not yet. But he began to lay a foundation, one built on facts, not pretense. He enrolled his son in counseling. They started weekly hikes together. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. Both seemed to understand that rebuilding doesn't always require explanation. Only consistency. In the months that followed, Julia moved out. She relocated to Oceanside, took a position at a smaller nonprofit, and rented an apartment near the pier. She saw Adam once, briefly, during a supervised visit arranged by the court. The session was short, strained. She didn't return the next week. David didn't press the matter. He reorganized the house, cleared the master bedroom, painted Adam's room a brighter color, planted a new tree in the yard. Small changes. Tangible ones. Evidence of a life beginning again, not from ashes, but from understanding. He also had the locks changed. Not out of malice, but finality. One morning, while sorting through old files, he found the family photo from their last anniversary dinner. The one Julia had avoided. He stared at it for a long time, then placed it in a box labeled Archive. He didn't throw it away. He simply didn't need to see it anymore. David never contacted Ben Carter. There was no confrontation, no demand for apology. He had no interest in acknowledgement. He had taken back what was his, not through emotion, but through structure. Through fact. Through law. He built a new life not to prove a point, but because the old one had been compromised beyond repair. And when friends asked, quietly, cautiously, how he had managed to keep so calm, so precise, so unshaken, he simply said he had made a choice. To act, not react. To move forward, not wallow. He had rebuilt his home. He had protected his son. He had told the truth. And now his son knows who his real father is. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, about real men who don't shout. They act. Coldly? To the end?